Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today into a city that's always captivating.
Always.
Los Angeles.
Yeah.
The city of angels, sunshine, and
Uh,
unfortunately,
Fire.
yeah, fire. Lots and lots of fire.
More ways than one.
And I don't just mean the kind that's on the news every summer.
Right. Los Angeles, it's burning in more ways than one. You got those literal wildfires fueled by climate change and unfortunately sometimes human actions too. But then there's this like metaphorical firestorm too.
Yeah.
That relentless LA culture.
Yeah.
The pressure cooker of it all, the striving.
Constant striving.
Yeah. The always on mentality.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And it's especially, I think for someone outside looking in, it can feel very
surreal.
You know? On one hand, you've got these images of like idyllic beaches, right? Red carpets, glamour.
Right.
But then on the other, you've got apocalyptic scenes of these wildfires ripping through these neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It's like these two completely different worlds are colliding.
It is. It's a fascinating paradox, really. We got these articles talking about how residents are like posting Instagram stories with ash falling in the background. Like it's
another day.
Just another day, just another Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's almost like these intense events have become normalized. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like part of life there.
And that's what we're going to,
unpack.
Yeah, unpack today. This strange interplay between the literal and the metaphorical fires of Los Angeles.
Right, yeah.
So we'll look at how climate change is impacting the frequency and intensity of these wildfires,
right?
But also how the culture of LA itself can feel like you're constantly battling against burnout.
Yeah,
and we'll delve into some specific examples of that.
Right. Yeah, like we've got research on how the entertainment industry, with its focus on youth and beauty, how that contributes to this whole pressure cooker thing.
Right.
There's even data showing that the average career lifespan of an actor in Hollywood is shockingly short.
So you're saying even in this like land of dreams, right?
Yeah.
This like undercurrent of anxiety and this pressure.
Yeah.
Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, almost like everyone's just trying to outrun the flames of like obscurity.
Right. And it just makes you wonder, what are those long-term consequences, of living in that kind of environment? Is this fire fatigue something we should actually be
worried about?
Yeah, concerned about.
It's a question worth exploring, for sure.
Yeah.
We've got experts that argue that this normalization of these extreme events, both in terms of climate change and cultural pressures, it could have some serious psychological implications.
Right.
Like people might be adapting, but at what cost?
At what cost? Okay, so we've got these literal fires raging, fueled by climate change and human actions. And this metaphorical firestorm of LA culture with this intense pressure to succeed and this ever-present threat of burnout.
Right.
But before we go any deeper into that, I think it's important to understand like the science behind these wildfires.
Absolutely.
Right.
Because those like Instagram photos of those smoke-filled skies, they might seem surreal, but the reality is these fires are incredibly destructive.
Right.
They're not just, scorching the landscape. They're impacting air quality. They're destroying homes. They're displacing communities.
Right. And they're becoming more frequent and intense.
Yeah.
Right. And that's where climate change comes in.
Exactly. Yeah. Our sources are clear on that. Climate change is a major factor in the increasing severity of wildfires in California.
Right.
Like we're talking hotter temperatures, drier conditions, and longer fire seasons.
Right.
It's like we're creating the perfect tinderbox for these fires to just ignite and spread.
So even something as, simple as a spark from a car tire on the highway can have these devastating consequences.
Precisely.
Wow.
And what's particularly interesting is that, like, researchers have actually identified a feedback loop.
Oh, wow.
So these fires, they release massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, which further exacerbates climate change, which creates, even more favorable conditions for future fires. So it's like a vicious cycle.
That's pretty alarming. Makes you realize that these wildfires aren't just, a California problem. It's a global
issue.
Yeah.
With some far-reaching consequences.
That we're not just talking about, like, environmental impacts, right? There are economic and social.
Absolutely. Huge costs.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the cost of firefighting efforts.
Right.
The damage to property and infrastructure.
Yeah.
the displacement of communities.
And the impact on people's health,
Oh, yeah.
both physical and mental.
Absolutely.
We've got sources here talking about the long-term effects of smoke inhalation.
Yeah.
The trauma of losing your home, your livelihood, and just that constant anxiety of living in a fire-prone area.
It's a multifaceted issue for sure.
Yeah.
It's going to require like a multi-pronged approach.
Right.
We need to address those root causes of climate change.
Right.
Implement sustainable land management practices.
Right.
Find ways to build like more resilient communities.
So it's not just about putting out the fires.
No.
It's about preventing them.
Exactly. It requires a whole shift in mindset.
Right.
We need to move from a reactive approach to a proactive one.
So we've talked about the literal fires, the science behind them, the role of climate change.
Right.
But let's shift gears a little.
Okay.
And delve into that other kind of fire that we mentioned earlier, the metaphorical firestorm of LA culture.
Right. Because while that like physical threat of wildfires is, undeniable. Right.
There's also this intangible but equally intense pressure that comes with living in a city like LA.
Yeah, it's like everyone's trying to make it big to stand out from the crowd to achieve that elusive something more.
That something more, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and that relentless pursuit of success.
Right.
That need to constantly prove yourself. It can be so draining.
It's like you're always on edge.
Always.
Always striving, never quite feeling like you've arrived.
Yeah. And this pressure cooker environment, it can manifest in like so many different ways.
Right.
We've got sources here talking about the like unrealistic beauty standards perpetuated by the entertainment industry, the cutthroat competition and, creative fields, the constant pressure to project this perfect image
on social media.
It's
like everyone's trying to outshine each other.
Yeah.
Create this like curated version of themselves that's always happy and perfect,
successful,
and effortlessly glamorous.
And it's so unattainable.
Right.
It's
And this constant comparison, this need to keep up with the Joneses can lead to
a lot of feelings of inadequacy, anxiety, and ultimately burnout.
You're saying that even in like the city of sunshine and dreams, there's this undercurrent of darkness.
Absolutely.
This sense that everyone's secretly struggling.
Yeah. And while there's nothing, inherently wrong with ambition or striving for success, it's when it becomes all-consuming.
Right.
When it starts to erode your sense of self-worth and your well-being, that's when it becomes a problem.
It's like you're sacrificing your inner peace for
external validation.
Yeah.
And that's
a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's not good.
Yeah.
And it's not just individuals who are feeling the heat either.
Right.
We've got sources talking about the spiritual arson of LA culture.
Spiritual arson. Yeah. Like how the city's relentless pursuit of fame and fortune can leave people feeling empty and disconnected.
So it's not just a city that's literally on fire.
Right.
But metaphorically burning people out.
Exactly.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is like these two types of fire, the literal and metaphorical, they seem to be feeding off each other.
Right.
Creating this cycle of destruction and renewal that's like unique to LA.
Yeah, it's like this constant dance with the flames.
It is.
But before we get into that, I think it's important to understand, like the psychology of burnout.
Absolutely.
What are the signs?
Yeah.
What are the triggers? And most importantly, like what can we do to prevent it?
That's a great question. And one that's particularly relevant to like the LA experience.
Right.
Because in a city that thrives on hustle and ambition, recognizing the signs of burnout can be tricky.
Yeah.
It's almost like it's woven into the fabric of the culture.
Right. So you're saying in a city where everyone's pushing themselves to the limit, it can be hard to tell the difference between healthy striving and unhealthy obsession.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be self-aware.
Right.
To tune in to your body, your mind, your emotions.
So what are some of the signs that you might be on the path to burnout?
Well, one of the first signs is often like exhaustion.
Okay.
Not just like physical fatigue, but a deep sense of emotional and mental depletion.
Right.
You might find yourself feeling drained, cynical, and irritable. You might have trouble concentrating or making decisions.
And it's not just about feeling tired.
Right.
It's about feeling like you're running on empty, like you have nothing left to give.
Exactly. Yeah. And as burnout progresses,
Right.
you might start to experience other symptoms such as like changes in your sleep patterns, appetite, or your social habits. You might withdraw from activities you once enjoyed. Or you might find yourself working longer and longer hours without feeling any sense of accomplishment.
Right, and this can become a vicious cycle, right?
They can.
The more burned out you feel, the harder it is to function.
Right.
Which just leads to more stress.
More stress, more exhaustion. It's a downward spiral.
And that's why it's so important to address burnout early on.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you're starting to experience any of these symptoms, it's crucial to just like take a step back and really evaluate what's going on in your life.
What's going on,
Yeah.
Figure out what's important.
So what are some practical steps then that people can take to prevent or recover from burnout?
Well, one of the most important things is to set boundaries.
Okay.
To create clear distinctions between, like, work time and personal time, to prioritize self-care and to learn to say no to commitments that drain your energy.
It's about recognizing you can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also about, like, cultivating a sense of self-compassion.
Right.
To recognize that you're not a machine.
Right.
You have limits. And it's okay to ask for help when you need it.
And in a city like LA, where the pressure to succeed can be so intense, that can be tough.
It can be a tough thing to do.
Right.
Yeah, but it's so essential.
Right.
Because ultimately, burning out won't help you achieve your goals.
Right.
It'll just hinder your progress.
So how does this idea of burnout tie back to the idea of LA being on fire, both literally and metaphorically?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because just as wildfires can, like, clear away dead brush and create space for new growth, sometimes a personal or societal burn down can be necessary for transformation.
You mean like the phoenix rising from the ashes?
Exactly.
Okay.
And this idea of fire as a force for transformation that the theme will be exploring throughout our deep dive today.
Right.
We'll look at how both literal and metaphorical fires can be catalysts for change, you know, both individually and collectively.
So while it might seem counterintuitive, you're saying these intense destructive events can actually lead to something positive. Positive.
Yeah, because sometimes it takes a breakdown to create a breakthrough.
Wow.
And in a city like Los Angeles, where the stakes are high and the pressure's constant, that potential for transformation is immense.
This is starting to feel like more than just a deep dive into LA. It's like a journey of self-discovery.
That's the beauty of it. And that's what makes Los Angeles such a fascinating subject, you know? It's a city that's constantly evolving, constantly reinventing itself.
And sometimes that reinvention involves a little bit of fire.
Exactly.
So for our listener, we're asking you to consider this. What are the fires burning in your life, both literally and metaphorically?
Yeah.
And how might they be opportunities for growth and transformation?
It's a question worth pondering, because even amidst the chaos and destruction, there's always potential for something new to emerge.
So stay tuned as we continue a deep dive into the heart of Los Angeles. We'll be exploring the idea of fire as a force for transformation in more detail.
Yeah.
And we'll look at how this concept plays out in the lives of real Angelinos.
And we'll also delve into some practical tips for navigating the challenges of living in a city that's constantly on fire.
So buckle up, listener.
Yeah.
It's going to be a wild ride.
Indeed it is.
Yeah.
We left off talking about burnout and that whole pressure cooker of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But there's a flip side to that. like this incredible energy, this constant striving for something new, something better.
Yeah, it's like the city itself is fueled by this burning desire to create, to innovate, to push boundaries. You see it everywhere. From the tech startups in Silicon Beach to those independent filmmakers in Silver Lake.
Yeah, it's that spirit of reinvention, I think.
Yeah.
That draws people to Los Angeles.
Right.
You know, people come from all over the world to chase their dreams here.
Right.
To shed those old identities and build new ones.
Right.
You could be a struggling artist in Iowa one day.
Right.
And a successful screenwriter in Hollywood the next.
We've got a source here, a sociologist, who actually compares Los Angeles to this giant social experiment.
Interesting.
Like a living laboratory for reinvention.
Yeah, and that constant churn.
Right.
That willingness to, like, embrace change and take risks.
Right.
It's both exhilarating and exhausting.
Yeah.
It's like living in this perpetual state of becoming.
But isn't there a danger in that, though? I mean, like,
absolutely.
This constant striving to reinvent yourself, to chase the next big thing, Could that lead to a sense of never truly arriving, of always feeling like you're not enough?
Yeah, for sure. It's the paradox of reinvention.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It can be both liberating and
Disorienting.
disorienting. Yeah. You're constantly shedding these old versions of yourself.
Right.
But are you ever truly comfortable in your own skin?
Right.
You know, we've got a study here looking at social media use in Los Angeles.
Okay.
And the findings are fascinating.
Let's hear it.
So the study suggests that the pressure to project this perfect image online,
Right. Right.
to curate this highlight reel of your life,
Right.
it's particularly intense in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
And this can lead to a disconnect between your online persona
Right.
and your real self.
So it's like you're living a double life, trying to keep up with the Joneses, both online and offline.
Exactly. And this constant performance, this
Yeah.
need to always be on.
Yeah.
It can be so draining.
Yeah.
One of the sources even calls it the tyranny of the highlight reel.
The tyranny of the highlight reel. Wow. And it makes you wonder, are people truly reinventing themselves, or are they just conforming to a new set of expectations, a new set of pressures?
Yeah, that's a question worth considering for sure.
Yeah.
It's because true reinvention isn't about fitting in.
Right.
It's about standing out.
Right.
It's about embracing your authentic self,
Right.
even if it's messy, imperfect, or unconventional.
So how do you navigate this culture of reinvention without getting lost in the process? How do you find that balance between adapting to the environment and staying true to yourself? It's like walking a tightrope over a bed of hot coals.
Yeah, it's not easy, but there are ways to do it.
Okay.
One key, according to this psychologist we're citing, is self-awareness.
Self-awareness.
Yeah, it's about being mindful of those pressures
Right.
and expectations around you,
Uh-huh.
but also staying connected to your own values and aspirations.
So you're saying it's about being conscious of the forces that are shaping you, but not letting them define you.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that requires a certain level of introspection,
Mm-hmm.
of being willing to ask yourself those tough questions, what
Right.
are your motivations? What are you hoping to achieve?
Right.
And most importantly, is this path you're on truly aligned with your values?
That's easier said than done, especially in a city like Los Angeles where everyone seems to be chasing after the same brass ring.
It is, but it's essential.
Right.
Because if you're not careful, you can easily get swept up in the current.
Right.
Carried away by that tide of expectations.
And end up somewhere you never intended to be.
Exactly.
Right. So how do you avoid that then? How do you stay grounded amidst the chaos?
Well, one strategy we came across that resonated was this idea of finding your tribe.
Your tribe, like a support system.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
It's about surrounding yourself with people who share your values.
Right.
Who support your dreams, who challenge you to grow, people who will celebrate your successes.
Right.
And help you navigate your failures.
Because let's face it, in a city like Los Angeles, you're going to have both.
You'd have both, yeah.
Yeah.
And having that strong support system, it can make all the difference.
Right.
It's like having a safety net
Right.
when you're walking that tightrope.
It's about knowing that even if you fall, there are people there to catch you.
Exactly, yeah.
Right.
And that sense of belonging,
Right.
being seen and supported for who you truly are,
Right.
it can be so empowering.
So it's not just about reinventing yourself. It's about finding your people.
Right.
The ones who will help you navigate the flames and emerge stronger on the other side.
Exactly.
Now, that's an inspiring thought.
It is.
But let's get back to something you said earlier about the need for introspection.
Right.
It seems like a lot of people come to Los Angeles to escape their past, right? To shed those old identities and create these new ones.
Yeah.
But can you truly reinvent yourself without first confronting who you are?
That's a great point. And it gets to the heart of what true transformation is all about. Because it's not just about, changing your outward appearance and your circumstances. Yeah. It's about going deeper, about examining your beliefs, your values, your motivations. Yeah. It's about understanding the patterns and habits that are holding you back and making a conscious choice to change them.
So it's not about running away from your past. It's about learning from it and using it as fuel for your future.
Exactly. And that can be a challenging process.
Yeah.
It requires vulnerability, honesty, and a willingness to face your shadows.
And in a city that's so focused on image and perception, that can be a radical act.
Absolutely, yeah. because it's about embracing the, like, messy, imperfect parts of yourself.
Right.
The parts you might be tempted to hide or deny.
Right.
You know?
And that's where that fire metaphor comes in again, right?
Right.
It's about allowing yourself to be burned by the flames of self-discovery, right? To let go of those old, outdated versions of yourself and emerge as something
new.
Yeah.
And that process of burning and rebuilding, it's not always pretty.
Right.
It can be painful, confusing, and disorienting.
But it's through those fires that we forge our truest selves, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And that's the beauty of, like, the human spirit, you know?
Right.
We have this incredible capacity for resilience, for growth, for transformation. Even in the face of adversity, we can find a way to rise from those ashes.
And in a city like Los Angeles, where the flames are always burning, whether literally or metaphorically, that capacity for transformation is, like, essential for survival.
It is, and it's what makes Los Angeles, I think, such a, like, vibrant, dynamic, and ultimately hopeful place.
Okay, so we've talked about reinvention, about the importance of self-awareness and finding your tribe, and about the transformative power of fire.
Yeah.
But let's get practical for a moment.
Okay.
What are some tangible things that people can do to navigate the challenges of living in a city that's constantly pushing them to their limits? What can our listener do to not only survive but thrive in this environment?
Well, one of those important things is to prioritize self-care.
Self-care.
Yeah, and I'm not just talking about, like, bubble baths and face masks, although those can be helpful.
Right.
It's about, like, making a conscious effort to nourish your mind, body, and soul.
Give us some specifics. What does that look like in practice?
It could be as simple as getting enough sleep, eating healthy foods, exercising regularly. It could also involve, you know, spending time in nature, practicing mindfulness, or pursuing creative hobbies.
It's about finding activities that replenish your energy and bring you joy.
Yeah.
Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be able to handle the demands of living in this high-pressure environment.
Exactly. And it's also about setting boundaries. Yeah, learning to say no to commitments that drain your energy.
Right.
To prioritize your own needs, to create a healthy work-life balance.
And in a city where everyone's always hustling,
that
can be a radical act in itself.
It can.
Right.
But it's so essential because if you're not setting those boundaries, you're essentially giving other people permission to control your time and energy.
And that's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah, exactly.
So self-care and boundaries are two key pillars of thriving in Los Angeles.
Absolutely.
But there's another piece of the puzzle, right?
There is, yeah.
That's often overlooked, and that's community.
Right. Community.
We talked about finding your tribe earlier.
Yeah.
But what does that look like on a practical level?
It's about connecting with people who share your values, your interests, your passion.
Right.
It's about building relationships that are, like, supportive, nurturing, and inspiring.
Because let's face it, Los Angeles can be a lonely city, even when you're surrounded by millions of people.
It can, and finding your community can make all the difference.
Right.
It's about having that sense of belonging, of knowing you're not alone in this journey.
So self-care, boundaries, community. Those are three key ingredients for thriving in Los Angeles.
They are, and they're also relevant to anyone who's feeling the heat, you know, whether you're living in a big city or a small town.
Because at the end of the day, the challenges we're talking about, the pressure to succeed, the fear of failure, that constant striving for something more, these are human experiences that transcend geography.
Absolutely. And it's through embracing our shared humanity, through escorting each other, that we can navigate these challenges and emerge stronger on the other side.
Now, that's a message that resonates. But before we wrap up our dig dive, I want to go back to something you said earlier about the transformative power of fire.
Okay.
It's a powerful metaphor.
It is.
But how does it play out in real life? What does it actually look like to let yourself be burned by the flames of experience and emerge as something new?
That's a great question. And I think it's different for everyone.
Right.
You know, but ultimately it's about being willing to let go of what's no longer serving you, to embrace the unknown, and to trust the process.
Can you give us an example, something concrete that our listener can relate to?
Sure. Imagine someone who's been working at a job they hate for years.
Okay.
You know, they're miserable, but they're afraid to quit because they don't know what else they would do.
Right.
They're stuck in a rut, feeling trapped by their circumstances.
That's a familiar scenario for a lot of people, I'm sure.
It is.
Yeah.
Now imagine that person finally reaches a breaking point.
Okay.
They get laid off.
Right.
Or they have a health scare.
Right.
Or they simply just can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
They're forced to confront their situation
Right.
and make a change.
That's the fire, right? That
Yeah.
catalyst that forces them to take action.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And it might feel scary,
Right.
even devastating at first. But what if that burn down is actually an opportunity? What if it frees them up to pursue their true passion?
Right.
To take a risk?
You're right.
To reinvent themselves?
So it's not about seeking out pain or hardship, but about recognizing that sometimes those difficult experiences can lead to unexpected growth.
Absolutely. And that's like the paradox of transformation.
Right.
Right. It often rises from the ashes of what we thought we needed.
Right.
What we thought we wanted.
So it's about surrendering to the process, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels like everything is falling apart.
Exactly.
Right.
And that requires like a certain level of faith.
Uh-huh.
A belief that something better is waiting on the other side.
That's a powerful message. And it makes me think about all the people who've come to Los Angeles and achieved their dreams, despite facing incredible obstacles.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. Like think about the actors who were told they weren't good enough.
Right.
The musicians who were struggling to make ends meet. The entrepreneurs who were laughed at for their ideas.
Right.
They all faced, rejection, setbacks, moments of doubt.
Right.
But they persevered.
Right.
They kept pushing forward.
Right.
And they ultimately achieved their goals.
And they probably wouldn't be where they are today without those challenges, without those fires that forged their character and their resolve.
Exactly. And that's the lesson for all of us.
Right.
Whether we're living in Los Angeles or anywhere else in the world.
Right.
That the flames of experience can either consume us or refine us, depending on how we choose to engage with them. Precisely.
So we talked about the literal fires of climate change, right?
Right.
The metaphorical fires of LA culture and the personal fires of transformation.
Yeah.
What's the takeaway? Like, what does it all mean? For our listener who might be, miles away from California,
right,
but still feeling the heat in their own life.
Right. That's the question, isn't it? I think one of the big takeaways is that these fires, they're not unique to LA.
Right.
They're metaphors for challenges we all face.
Right.
The pressure to succeed, that fear of failure, the constant need to adapt and evolve.
So even if you've, never set foot in Hollywood,
right,
you can probably relate to this feeling of being like on fire, of being pushed to your limits.
Absolutely.
And what's interesting is that this idea of fire, it can be both.
Destructive and creative.
Yeah.
It can burn us down or it can refine us.
Right.
Depending on how we choose to engage with it.
Like we were saying earlier about those wildfires.
Right.
They can be devastating, but they also clear the way for new growth.
Exactly. And the same is true in our, personal lives too.
Right.
Sometimes we need to go through that period of intense change, of burning down old patterns and beliefs in order to create space for something new to emerge.
And that's where that idea of reinvention comes in, right? This willingness to let go of what's no longer serving us, to embrace the unknown, to step into the fire and see what happens.
Yeah, and that takes courage.
Yeah.
It takes a willingness to be uncomfortable.
Right.
To face our fears, to challenge our assumptions about who we are and what we're capable of.
It's like we're all walking a tightrope, trying to find that balance between staying grounded and letting ourselves be swept away by those winds of change.
That's a great analogy.
Right.
And what's interesting is this idea of balance. It's also reflected in the natural world, too.
Oh, okay.
We've got sources here talking about the role of fire in maintaining healthy ecosystems.
How so?
Well, like in some forests, wildfires are actually essential for regeneration.
Oh, wow.
They clear out dead brush, create space for new seedlings to grow, and release nutrients back into the soil.
So it's not just about destruction, then it's about creating the conditions for new life to flourish.
Exactly. And I think there's a powerful lesson there for us as individuals.
Right.
Sometimes we need to let go of the old, the dead, the things that are no longer serving us in order to create that space for something new to grow.
That's a beautiful metaphor.
It is.
But it's also a scary one, right? Like letting go of the familiar, embracing the unknown.
It can be...
That can be terrifying.
It can be terrifying, but it can also be like incredibly liberating.
Right.
Yeah. It's about trusting that process of burning and rebuilding.
Right.
Of destruction and creation.
Yes.
Ultimately a force for good.
It's about having faith that even when things fall apart,
Yeah.
Something better is waiting on the other side.
Exactly, and that's what I find so inspiring about Los Angeles, you know?
Right.
It's a city that's constantly being tested by fire.
Yeah.
Both literally and metaphorically.
Right.
But it always seems to find a way to rise from the ashes.
Right.
Stronger and more resilient than ever before.
Yeah. It's like a phoenix constantly being reborn.
Exactly.
Right.
And I think there's a lesson there for all of us, you know?
Right.
No matter what challenges we're facing, no matter how intense the heat gets,
Right.
we have the power to choose how we respond.
Right.
We can let the flames consume us.
Right.
Or we can use them to fuel our transformation.
So, to our listener, we're asking you to consider this. What are the fires burning in your life right now?
Yeah.
And how can you use them as opportunities for growth, for reinvention, for becoming the best version of yourself?
It's a powerful question.
It is.
And one that we encourage you to explore because within each of us lies that potential for extraordinary resilience, for remarkable transformation.
Yeah.
And sometimes all it takes is a spark to ignite that inner fire.
And if you're ever feeling overwhelmed by the heat, remember those survival tips.
Yes.
Find your tribe, prioritize self-care, and set those boundaries.
Absolutely.
You got this.
You do.
And remember, even amidst the flames, there's always beauty to be found, strength to be discovered, and hope to be rekindled.
So true.
So keep that fire burning, listener, but burn bright, not out. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep diving deep.